He is an advocate for secular democratic Iran. He was born in Iran but resides in the United States. Heir to his late father, the Shah, he is devoted to the cause of free speech, women's rights, and free society for Iran. So thank you both very much for joining us. I wanted to start with you, Nazanin. You have long advocated for women of Iran, and you've recently dedicated your role in Lord of the Rings to Iranian women. Tell us about that and why, and what kind of response you're getting from Iranian women.
It's so good to be with you all. Thank you, Kitty. Thank you, Prince Reza Pahlavi. I have been in the Iran advocacy space for 15 years now. When I got this role in Lord of the Rings several years ago, it took us a long time to film it, a pandemic and everything. But basically, this role is of an everyday woman who is catapulted into having to assume a leadership position, and her courage and her tenacity reminded me of. I drew inspiration basically from the brave women of Iran, who there's a reason why they call them Shurzan or lioness, because of their tenacity in the face of the tyranny they've been facing for 44 years. So in an insane turn of events, just 2 months before Mahsa Amini was murdered, I was sitting at San Diego Comic-Con and I dedicated this role to the brave women of Iran. And just 2 months later, I found myself on the steps outside the LA Federal Building with 20,000 protesters standing with the Woman Life Freedom Movement. And what has unfolded in the past 6 months is unprecedented. Of course, women are the spark and the engine of this revolution. But you know, what's really unprecedented is now you're seeing their brothers, their sons, their fathers, husbands standing shoulder to shoulder with them, something that terrifies this regime, because for 44 years, they have, the pillar of the regime has been built on segregating and oppressing women. So to see them standing together for what has become a pro-democracy movement, revolution, terrifies this regime. And we have been in touch, of course, with civil society inside Iran, with women, with girls, the brave girls who are being gassed, who have been gassed for the past 6 months, to stop them from getting an education, to stop them from dissenting. Raped, killed, imprisoned, beaten, and despite that they continue. And all they're asking for is for us to take action on their behalf internationally. And we can speak more about that later.
Your Highness, you have long institutional memory of the country, and maybe you could just explain for our audience how we've progressed through the different phases in Iran and I'd love your input on where we stand today, and do you think it's a unique moment in Iran's history?
First of all, I'm very happy to be here tonight. Thanks for inviting us and including us. My memories of how Iran was and how far women have gone, in contrast to where they are today, is mind-boggling. From Shirin Ebadi, Nobel Prize winner as a highest court judge in Iran, to Mahnaz Afghani, who was a minister, to a time where, as I was finishing my Air Force training, I was supposed to go back to Iran. By then, we would have our first women fighter pilots in the Iranian Air Force serving. Look at where women are now under this regime. And because we had reached those potentials, when Iranian women earned the right to vote 8 years before the people in Switzerland did, the women in Switzerland did. And in contrast to what we have now, we can imagine the potential that yet again could exist in the future, but at the same time, how much we have learned in the process. And I think one of the biggest barriers to the advance of women, particularly in the Middle East and particularly in the Islamic world, was the factor of religion itself. And this regime, in the name of religion, started to antagonize women from the get-go. Today, the generation of Mahsa understand fully the importance of a secular future where religion is separated from state as a prerequisite to democracy in order to achieve true human rights at all levels. We are talking about ethnic rights, we're talking about sexual rights, LGBTQ community, for example, which has also been persecuted, religious persecution. Everything was tied to that. And even though 50 years ago, as I was growing up, maybe talking about religion might have been taboo, today is no longer the case. And that's a huge, huge development in terms of the political process of maturing in that sense and understanding the consequences of it and the importance of it. And therefore, in that sense, I think the future is extremely bright. And because this is truly, in my view, the first revolution of women in the whole world of its kind, it's led by women, but as Nazanin was saying, it's entirely backed by their fathers, their brothers, their sons. It is, therefore, a truly nation-grasping moment. And in that sense, you might have seen in the past 40 years various periods where Iranians were demonstrating or protesting, but this is truly different this time. This is truly do or die. We know that we have no option but to succeed, and this is why it is important for the world to understand how critical it is to be on the right side of history this time. Many movements in the world were unable to succeed peacefully without outside support. I remember talking to former President de Klerk and his experience during the negotiations with the ANC and with Nelson Mandela and what led ultimately to a solution. Or for that matter, what happened with Poland and Lech Walesa and the Solidarity movement. And I think there are many other examples that we could present of how important it is to have international support. And this is the reason Nazanin and I and many others have been on the road lately, talking to legislators, trying to, for the first time since they decided to finally talk to voices of the opposition, because until now the dialogue was limited only to the regime and its representatives. It's a good opportunity, and therefore we are utilizing it in our best possible way to inform the world, be the voice of our compatriots at home, who are often muzzled and unable to communicate directly. But ultimately, this is all with the idea of empowerment and bringing as much support as we can to our fellow compatriots back home.
Nazanin, you've been meeting with Biden administration officials. You've been really traveling the globe with this issue and calling attention to it. What is the feedback that you've been getting?
As Prince Pahlavi said, I think, this is unprecedented for two reasons. Iranian women have managed to galvanize Iranian society at large to understand the intersectionality of gender equality and every other basic human right, which the Iranian people have been denied for 44 years. And of course, they've been held hostages. So this isn't just now only a women's rights issue. It was sparked by women's rights. So when I met with the Biden administration, I think it was late October-ish of 2022, I got to meet the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and the National Security Advisor. And I made the case that this call is a grassroots movement from inside Iran. And we are simply conduits. We are getting messages from people inside Iran, and we want to let them know what is being said. And they listened, and they did promise me an ARIA formula meeting at the UN Security Council, which I then spoke at in November. And then we talked to them about kicking the Islamic Republic off of the Commission on Status of Women at the UN. And of course, everybody, Vital Voices was pivotal in this, so I'm very grateful for their incredible work. Everyone told us this is not possible. But in this moment, as you said, the mood has shifted. The international appetite for wanting to meet with opposition voices is there. And so we really are trying to seize this moment and make sure, of course, we succeeded in kicking the Islamic Republic off the And while for some that might seem symbolic and not really something that shifts anything inside Iran, I can assure you what it does is it delegitimizes the Islamic Republic. They were normalizing themselves by being on that body. So there's many steps we still need to take, and we will together try to do that as best we can. But again, as Prince Pahlavi said, there are more meetings to be had. We've engaged with the European Union. We've met with the Biden administration. There are more meetings coming. We just testified at the Canadian Parliament. And I think this moment is different because the synergy between inside and outside, the diaspora and the people of Iran, is creating a shift that is actually creating policy change that hopefully will tip the balance, because the margin between success and failure is slim, and we just need to tip the balance in favor of the protesters.
We're at a unique moment now, as opposed to previous times when there have been uprisings, in that we're in an age of incredible communications and just increasing at an exponential rate. And so the visibility is there, and that's absolutely critical, because if you don't have visibility on a grassroots uprising, it will continue in darkness. The world will not take as much notice. What I've been struck with is the ability of the news networks and the American press to actually keep this as a front burner issue. And I think it's very heartening that it has, but yet we're seeing certain communications breakdowns and so the sort of digital blocking that's going on. How do you assess the ability to maintain the communications momentum? I know you both are doing incredible things to keep the spotlight on this issue, but I worry that, if we have an interruption of communications with this movement, that we will not have the momentum that we need. Also, the world is very distracted at this moment by many other geopolitical issues. What's your assessment?
It has been one of our first and perhaps most important asks in terms of how practically the world can help us is the connectivity issue in access to the internet. Clearly, by now you will realize that the regime will try everything it can to repress information, to restrict access, to use whatever they can to have surveillance on people, spy on them. So VPNs and all that stuff becomes important. Starlink is trying to bring one aspect of it into the picture. There are a lot of experts working the problem in terms of in what different ways and shape can we make sure that access to the internet exists, because without it, we're pretty much dead in water. Anything that leads to messaging organizations, social media platforms, whatever it is that is being used right now, is extremely vital for anything that we need to do at home. And so this is one of the first elements that will make the difference between keeping the people in a position of doing something as opposed to be completely blind and in the dark and unable to communicate with the world, and the impact of the kind of footages that we see on a daily basis coming from inside Iran. Example, the poisoning of schoolgirls and things of that nature that on the average, the major networks, whether in Europe or here, don't necessarily cover, but the information is out there. And we can certainly grab the interest of media to cover that because the actual material is out there. But the more we have access to this kind of footages and information, the more we can inform the world. And as a result of an informed world comes the pressure on legislation to act upon it. And we all know that public opinion is key in forcing legislators to have to be accountable and answerable to their own circumscriptions and say, listen, we can no longer accept that. Free Nelson Mandela was more than anything initial public opinion putting pressure on governments who finally said, enough is enough, we can no longer accept this situation. So yes, it is very important that we are able to communicate and provide the whole world with the information, because it's not good enough for us to know it. We need the world to find out about it too.
Can I chime in? I'm so sorry. I just want to add something really quickly. In agreement with what you were saying, what's happening right now is, as we've seen in history, from Argentina to Chile to Brazil to Philippines to Poland in the 1980s, when women's participation in these movements is central, the chance of them succeeding is higher, because activists like us have more access to levers of power and control inside society, and women have that power. And we're seeing these images of an elderly woman wearing a hijab march up to her son in the security forces, take him by the arm and lead him away from conducting a brutal crackdown on protesters, or a brave dissident journalist who's been imprisoned for almost 5 years, come out of jail, immediately take off her compulsory hijab and say, death to the supreme leader. This type of courage is something we've never seen before. But what we need in order for this to succeed, as we ended apartheid in South Africa, which really captured the international zeitgeist, all of us were in this. We wanted to ensure equality for Black South Africans. We have to legally define gender apartheid. It hasn't been defined in the international legal. And if we manage to do that, and there is a campaign, endgenderapartheid.today, please add your names, please amplify this campaign, because if we define that, we have a way to hold the Islamic Republic account legally on an international scale and hopefully free the entire country.
Well, media helps, and your visibility helps, and your voices help very much. One of the things that's really striking about this issue is the youth of the young ladies who are taking part in these demonstrations. I mean, they're extraordinarily young, and you know, some barely in their teens. And I think that the whole world is kind of shocked at the brutal repression of such young women. Nazanin, I know you are in communication with some, you've had feedback from some. Tell us a little bit about what it's like to you know, communicate with young Iranian women, and because of your heritage, it must be exceptionally poignant.
It is. I left Iran when I was 20 days, so to have this connection with the girls and the young girls now who have only ever known an Islamic Republic, and yet they're saying death to the Islamic Republic. They're removing the compulsory hijab despite the propaganda of this regime that has tried to brainwash them into thinking that this is the way to live. But they have a connection to us because we, of course, now have internet, even though it is being cracked down heavily. They have grown up understanding what it looks like to have the freedom of choice when it comes to your dress, to not have to, you know, the legal age of marriage, for example, pre-1979 was 18 for women, and it got reduced to 9 after the Islamic Revolution. Yes, it was later raised to 15 in 2002, but girls as young as 9 can still get married at the age of 9 with the permission of a judge or their father. So the situation in Iran for girls is dire, and to communicate with them and to have them say, please stop the West from saying that these are cultural differences. It's insulting to the girls and the women of Iran to say that they don't deserve the same freedoms that we enjoy, to say that, well, that's what it's supposed to be like over there. It's not. They are just like us, and they want the same freedoms. That's the message I get every day, is please tell the world that we are just like you, and we deserve the same freedoms that you enjoy every day.
I've seen the footage of the girls of Ekbatan starting to dance to rap music, by the way, a very Western message, and the rest of the country followed suit. Why would they dance to a rap music of a Western singer as opposed to any other dance, or maybe an Iranian-style dance? It's messaging to the world that while they're defying their own regime, they're aligning values with the same values that the Western world has to offer. That's an important code in that message itself.
It's a change in the culture. This is a bit of a push-pull situation because you have such extreme poverty, extreme economic deprivation going on in the country, and so that's why you're getting this real surge of grassroots desire for change, not just from women, from everyone. It's a more broad-based revolutionary movement. You're also getting the pull because the Western world is looking at this and saying this is not right, and you're getting forums like this where everyone is speaking out. How much help do you need from the West, and how much more has to come up from the bottom? So how much of this push-pull is necessary to bring this to some kind of a moment?
You know, one of the questions that we often hear is, what's going to happen next? What will fill the vacuum should this regime disappear? Can it be another Syria, or is it going to be something else? And the first thing I tell the world is, first of all, look at the composition of the Iranian diaspora living in different countries: the United States, Canada, France, Germany, Sweden. many countries, and look at the composition of the Iranian diaspora in terms of their education, in terms of their impact in the various sectors of those societies, as doctors, as professionals, as entrepreneurs. And imagine how many of these people could have been right now back in their own country, helping the country. And many of them probably would go back, and many of them would not even need to go back, but still contribute. They'll be the best ambassadors for all these countries to reconnect Iran to that path. And these are the kind of people who have been totally disenfranchised or completely ignored by the regime, because the regime doesn't care about Iran's progress. They rather fund Hezbollah in Lebanon to hit Israel with missiles. They're not interested in the welfare of Iran. And that's part of the reason why many Iranians, even though they would hate to have to leave outside of the country, could not go back or would have no interest in going back and contributing so long as the current circumstances exist. But imagine at the minute the circumstances were to change, how huge of a difference it makes, and how many of the true voices of those who actually care inside Iran, from environmentalists to health specialists to economists and all that, will immediately replace this mafia-governed country by the IRGC that controls everything, and oh, by the way, putting them on the terrorist list will be a huge, huge element, which is part of legislations and political actions that we are asking world governments to actually implement. All of these are factors that we would like to have done in terms of a new approach in policy, as opposed to a lingering hope for a JCPOA 2.0 to bring anything to a solution. We are well beyond that. This is a true opportunity for radical change that will have immediate impact, obviously regionally, but also beyond the region, and the consequences for the outside world. While the current regime is working with Russia to help them with drones to hit on innocent Ukrainian civilians, and there's that access going on, Europe has to absorb more and more refugees coming, and they're already saturated, they can't afford that. They're wondering what kind of energy dependence they can be forced to continue to endure if another option is not open to them, and oh, by the way, Iran could be the best solution to their problem in terms of energy requirements. So what are you waiting for? And the most obvious thing is, look, you are looking at a regime that its DNA is in complete contradiction to every value that we as secular Democrats and the majority of the Iranian people share with you, and your best natural army in place. All you need to do is to give us that extra help to push them over. And this is what we've been talking to world governments. We're not just, chasing a rainbow or talking about the obvious things. There are practical steps that can be taken, but there has to be the political will to do it. And again, it ties back to how much public opinion can now pressure, particularly Western government, that you can no longer drag your feet and waste time. This is an opportunity. The Iranian people ask for it. We want to support it. Therefore, go ahead and do the right thing.
Nazanin, I give you the last word. We're almost out.
I mean, I agree. The brain drain for Iran is something very serious. If you look at the best and the brightest, they're often imprisoned, persecuted, or exiled. And what does that say for the country? What future does a country hold when your best and brightest are persecuted in that way, and their rights taken away from them? All I can say is, please remember, as feminists, if you're feminists, if you believe in women's rights, that our plight is intertwined, inherently intertwined with the women of Iran, and supporting them helps the move for democracy inside the country. Because once you crumble the pillar of the Islamic Republic that oppresses women, there is nothing that terrifies this regime more than free, politically active women, and we need them to have the power to galvanize society at large, their sons, their husbands, their brothers, their fathers, to stand for a secular democracy, and I know that we can prevail.
Well, very well said. Please join me in thanking our panel.